Some World War II aircraft became legends. These became warnings. Today we're looking at machines so disastrously designed they put their own pilots in more danger than the enemy ever could. If you think the war's worst aircraft are obvious, stay with me, because the first one on this list fooled entire governments into believing it was a winner, until the sky proved otherwise. The Brewster Buffalo was supposed to be America's answer to modern air combat, a sleek, compact fighter that looked promising on the factory floor. But the moment it met real Japanese opposition in the Pacific, the illusion shattered. Underpowered, overweight, and shockingly slow, the Buffalo forced pilots into battles they were never meant to survive. Its biggest flaw? It wasn't built for the realities of World War II. The Navy kept loading more armor, more equipment, and more fuel onto the airframe, turning what was once an agile prototype into a lumbering target. In combat, it bled energy instantly, losing altitude and speed faster than pilots could correct. Against the A6M0, a fighter famous for its climb rate and turn radius, the Buffalo was basically stationary. During the Battle of Midway, Marine pilots flying the F-2A were massacred. They reported the aircraft shook violently during simple maneuvers, stalled unexpectedly, and fell apart under stress. One pilot said, "It's like flying a rock with wings painted on the side." Another wrote in his logbook that the Buffalo should be melted down and turned into something useful. Maintenance crews hated it too. Parts jammed, hydraulic lines leaked, and the landing gear had a habit of collapsing at the worst possible times. Even when the aircraft did function, its guns frequently jammed due to vibration and poor recoil absorption. The Buffalo wasn't just obsolete, it was dangerous. Entire squadrons begged for replacements, and within a year, the aircraft was removed from frontline service entirely. But what makes it even more shocking is that the next failure on this list wasn't just slow, it sent entire crews to their deaths in broad daylight, even when flying at full power. Subscribe now so you never miss the next unbelievable disaster coming up. The ferry battle was Britain's painful lesson in believing that a sleek design automatically meant modern performance. When it entered service in the late 1930s, commanders admired its clean monoplane shape, retractable landing gear, and enclosed cockpit. It looked like the future. Unfortunately, it flew like the past. Equipped with a single Merlin engine powering a heavy airframe, the battle struggled to reach acceptable speeds even in ideal conditions. By the time World War II erupted, German fighters were faster, deadlier, and far more maneuverable. The battle had no chance. During the Battle of France, entire formations were wiped out in minutes. Some missions suffered loss rates of over 50%, numbers almost unheard of in the early war. Its defensive capabilities were laughable: one forward gun and a single rear gun for the observer. Against waves of Bf-10-9s, it might as well have been unarmed. Enemy pilots described it as easy meat. One German fighter ace later admitted he felt almost guilty shooting them down. Pilots pushed the aircraft to its limits, but the battle punished bravery. It struggled to climb with a bomb load, overheated easily, and became sluggish during evasive maneuvers. Crews were forced to attack targets at dangerously low altitudes just to have a chance of hitting anything, turning the aircraft into a guaranteed casualty the moment it crossed enemy lines. Despite the catastrophic losses, the RAF tried to find roles for it: night missions, training, towing. But even then, the aircraft remained problematic. It simply had no place in a modern war. What's shocking is that our next aircraft wasn't just outdated. It was deadly even when sitting safely on the runway. And the reason why will make you rethink how an aircraft can fail before it ever reaches combat. The Macchi C.202 is often remembered as one of Italy's finest fighters of World War II, but that reputation only applies to the later, corrected versions. The early C.202s were a different story entirely. They became infamous among Italian pilots for unpredictable behavior, structural flaws, and terrifying reliability issues that killed airmen before they ever saw the enemy. The biggest problem was manufacturing inconsistency. Italy's aircraft industry lacked standardized precision machining, meaning early C.202s varied dramatically in build quality. Two fighters rolling out of the same factory could have entirely different handling characteristics, one stable and responsive, the other a disaster waiting to happen. Pilots frequently said each C.202 had its own personality, which sounds poetic until you realize that personality included sudden stalls, asymmetric lift, and fuel leaks mid-flight. The landing gear was a nightmare. Weak struts collapsed under minor stress, causing violent ground loops that destroyed aircraft on takeoff and landing. Many C.202s never made it past the runway. One training squadron reported the loss of 3 aircraft in a single week, none due to combat, all due to gear failures and structural cracks. Cooling issues added another layer of danger. The early radiators were fragile and poorly mounted. Even small vibrations could detach coolant lines, sending the temperature gauge skyrocketing. A C.202 could go from flying smoothly to overheating beyond recovery in seconds. Several pilots bailed out after smoke filled the cockpit while still above friendly territory. Armament problems made everything worse. Early Italian 12.7mm Breda Safat machine guns had low muzzle velocity and unreliable feed systems. Jams were so common that pilots joked firing a full burst without a stoppage was a religious miracle. Even maintenance crews struggled. There were no standardized parts across factories, meaning bolts, struts, and control surfaces were often incompatible. Ground crews had to custom fit pieces with hand tools, and in a war where seconds mattered, that was catastrophic. Despite all this, Italy pushed the aircraft into frontline service due to sheer desperation. But the truth was unavoidable. The early C.202 was a polished-looking death trap, a fighter that killed its own pilots long before it could contribute meaningfully to the war. And if you think structural weaknesses are bad, wait until you see what happens when an aircraft's wings could literally rip off in mid-dive, a flaw Japan learned about the hard way. If you're finding these disasters shocking, hit subscribe so you never miss the next unbelievable wartime engineering failure. Japan expected the D4Y1 Judy to be the successor to their successful dive bombers, faster, sleeker, and capable of outrunning American interceptors. On paper, it looked perfect. In reality, early versions of the Judy suffered from catastrophic structural defects so severe that pilots feared the aircraft more than enemy fire. The core flaw was its wing structure. The D4Y1 was rushed into production without sufficient stress testing. Engineers focused on speed and aerodynamic profile, sacrificing reinforcement in critical load-bearing areas. In high-speed dives, the aircraft vibrated violently, and under battlefield conditions, especially during steep bombing runs, several Judys suffered mid-air structural failure. Pilots watched their wings develop visible flexing, then heard metal groaning like a ship hull about to split. Some wings tore clean off. Compounding this danger was the engine, the liquid-cooled Atsuta, a licensed copy of the German Daimler-Benz DB601. Japan struggled to manufacture it at the precision required. The result? Chronic overheating, fuel line ruptures, and fires erupting without warning. In summer operations, pilots routinely reported flames licking the sides of the cowling before they even left formation. Because the D4Y1 lacked armor and self-sealing fuel tanks, any leak turned into a floating torch. Even small caliber hits from American fighters could ignite an entire aircraft. Some crews refused to fly the Judy on long missions, claiming it felt like carrying your own funeral pyre into the sky. Visibility was another hazard. The sleek canopy had significant distortion, especially along the sides, making formation flying and landing approaches extremely dangerous. Multiple Judys crashed simply because pilots misjudged the runway angle. Despite all these flaws, Japan kept pushing the D4Y1 into service because it was fast, dangerously fast for its own structural integrity. Only later, reinforced variants became reliable, but by then, the reputation was irreversible. What makes this even more chilling is that the next aircraft wasn't just fragile, it was outdated by nearly an entire decade before the first shot of the war was even fired, and what happened next became one of the war's most tragic mismatches. The Curtiss SB-2C Helldiver was supposed to be the US Navy's next-generation dive bomber, the modern successor to the beloved Douglas Dauntless. What the Navy got instead was a machine so notoriously unstable, so infuriating to fly, that pilots quickly abandoned its official name and gave it one far more honest, the Beast. And they weren't exaggerating. The Helldiver was a masterclass in how to sabotage your own war effort with one engineering decision after another. The core issue was weight. The Navy kept demanding more equipment, heavier armor, bigger bomb loads, longer range, and Curtiss kept adding to a design never meant to carry that burden. The result was a dive bomber that flew like a wounded anvil. On carrier approaches, pilots described the aircraft wobbling uncontrollably, sinking or ballooning without warning. One pilot said landing the Helldiver was like wrestling a refrigerator in a hurricane. Its hydraulic systems were just as unforgiving. Landing gear failed to extend. Dive brakes jammed mid-attack. Flaps refused to deploy or worse, deployed unevenly, sending the aircraft rolling violently during final approach. In training units, mechanical failures destroyed more aircraft than enemy action ever would. Even the tailhook couldn't be trusted. Instead of catching the arresting wire, it often bounced clean over it, sending multi-ton aircraft skidding across the deck or straight into the ocean. Maintenance crews called it a hangar queen, the kind of aircraft that spent more hours being fixed than actually flying. And when it did fly, the R2600 engine was prone to overheating and even in-flight fires. Pilots joked that if the enemy didn't get you, your own aircraft probably would. Yet despite all this, the Navy built more than 7,000 of them, more than any other Allied dive bomber in World War II. Because once the design finally stabilized, and after thousands of modifications, the Helldiver could perform. Just not without enormous blood and sweat from the people forced to tame it. It contributed at Leyte Gulf, at Okinawa, and in the final assaults on Japan. But even then, pilots never loved it. They simply survived it. The true tragedy: the aircraft it replaced, the SBD Dauntless, had already proven itself at Midway, sinking Japanese carriers and earning universal praise. The Navy swapped a legend for a liability, and the cost was measured in pilots' lives. And if you think this was the worst decision a military ever made under pressure, the next aircraft shows what happens when design flaws are so severe that even test pilots refuse to touch it. The PZL P.11 is one of the most tragic symbols of World War II's early air battles, not because it was a bad aircraft when it was created, but because Poland entered the most mechanized war in history, flying a machine already a full generation behind. When it was introduced in the early 1930s, the P.11 was a breakthrough, an all-metal monoplane at a time when most nations were still flying cloth and wood biplanes. But aviation advanced at a pace no one could keep up with. By 1939, the P.11 wasn't just outdated, it was hopelessly outclassed. Its top speed, just 245 miles per hour, was slower than nearly every frontline German aircraft. The Bf 109E, Germany's cutting-edge fighter, was over 120 miles per hour faster. That speed gap alone made aerial combat brutally one-sided. Polish pilots went into battle knowing they couldn't chase, couldn't escape, and couldn't dictate engagement range. Every fight began at a disadvantage. Worse, armament was painfully inadequate. Most P-11 variants carried only two 7.92mm machine guns with limited ammunition. German fighters carried cannons, so even when Polish pilots managed to line up a perfect shot, the damage they inflicted was often minimal, forcing them to stay in firing range far longer than was safe. Despite these limitations, the aircraft's open cockpit, high-mounted gull wings, and excellent low-speed maneuverability gave Polish pilots one advantage: visibility and agility during tight turns. Many German pilots underestimated this. A skilled P-11 pilot could sometimes lure an overeager Bf-109 into a turning fight, one of the few situations where the old Polish fighter could actually compete. But agility couldn't compensate for physics. The P-11 simply lacked the power and climb rate needed to intercept high-altitude bombers. When Luftwaffe raids began, Polish fighters scrambled desperately but often arrived too late or too low to make a difference. Even when they reached the bombers, their guns struggled to penetrate armor, forcing pilots to risk dangerously close attacks. The PZL P.11 is remembered not as a failure of design, but as a tragedy of timing, a capable fighter trapped in the wrong decade. It represents the brutal reality that when war arrives faster than innovation, even the bravest pilots can only do so much. These aircraft may have been disasters, but they left behind lessons written in metal, smoke, and hard-earned experience. World War II aviation wasn't just about legends, it was also shaped by the machines that failed spectacularly. If you enjoyed uncovering these forgotten stories, keep watching our channel's videos. There are countless more hidden chapters in aviation history waiting to take flight.